We will now call to order the meeting of the Provo Municipal Council work session. It is Tuesday, June 11th at 5:37 p.m. We'll now do the roll call. So the councilors present tonight are Gary Garrett, Becky Bogdan, George Handley, Rachel Whipple, and Travis Hoban. We also...
And Craig Christensen.
Greg, I'm delighted you're here. Wonderful.
Yay.
Christensen online. And then we have no mayor, but we have representatives from the mayor's office, so that's good. Okay, so we have Isaac Paxman, deputy mayor, and Scott Henderson, our CAO, and our council staff. All right. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called upon by the council chair. When speaking, please be sure to use a microphone so that the record is clear and those attending virtually can hear you. Please also be sure to limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the work meeting room. All right, our first order of business is a presentation regarding the fiscal year 25 tentative budget amendments. This will be presented by Kelsey Zarbach, our budget officer.
Okay. I want to thank Justin for getting this on the agenda for tonight. It just is nice to give you more of a heads up instead of presenting some changes right before the budget adoption night deadline. So just to give you some context, every year after we present the tentative budget, sometimes we get information from departments or we find some things that need to be corrected in the budget, just as you know, we're working with the council and have already presented the tentative budget. And so this presentation is just going through kind of a reconciliation of some things that we've found that we would recommend changing, either in an amendment to the current tentative budget or in the final adopted version of the budget. So this spreadsheet was included in the materials for this meeting. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at it. If you do want to, it's useful just to kind of see the accounting ins and outs of what's been changing. But just to give you an overview, if you look at that, any corrections are in yellow or that orange color. And then any new information is in blue. So you can kind of see like, oh, what was the mistake versus what is new information coming in. I recommend looking at the net impact column in that spreadsheet just because you can really see what, like, did it help the budget or hurt the budget? And so the green text means that it helped the budget in some way and red text means that it hurt the budget. So just kind of a key to help you understand that spreadsheet if you look at it. I've just summarized it here on the slide, so we won't be going through every single line. Okay, so I just want to go through the revenue corrections first. They're all related, and what they are is that there was some revenue reductions in the general fund, golf course, and ice sheet. They were all related to parks and rec. And what had happened is we had added some revenue on top of the revenues Parks and Rec had submitted to us because we didn't realize they had already built in the impact of passing sales tax to customers into their numbers. And so it was kind of like we both did work that we thought the other wouldn't do. And so we ended up with higher revenues than were intended. This didn't impact expenses in any way in the golf course or ice sheet funds because the net income for both of those funds was still higher than expenses after taking away some revenue, but there was an offset that was necessary in the general fund. I kind of want to explain this to you because it's a little tricky here. But if we go back to the budget ordinance, it talks about how in the general fund, we can budget up to $400,000 for the rec capital fund based on the net income in the rec center. So when we had budgeted extra rec center net income, we thought that the net income for the rec center was going to be $496,000. Only $400,000 of that net income could be budgeted toward the rec capital fund just based on how the ordinance works. And so we budgeted the $400,000, leaving about $96,000 that was supplementing the general fund in other areas. When we got the correct amount from Parks and Rec and realized that we needed to fix it, the rec center net income was still there. It was still high. The revenues were higher than expenses, but it was really only a net income of $169,000. And so we reduced the Parks and Rec capital fund budget to that $169,000. So it offset except for that $96,000. And so that's kind of where the general fund, we had to figure that one out. Yes.
Can you use the microphones?
Oh, sorry. I thought it was on. My bad. Why did we have the shortfall of 300K? It was not a shortfall, but less than we
Right.
expected.
It was basically miscommunication. We had wanted to budget for sales tax on top, like, because sales tax was going to be passed to
Got it.
customers.
We
And
just
so-
didn't do that. And so,
Well, we didn't think that Parks and Rec had built into their numbers. And so when we were finalizing the budget, we added the net impact that we believed should be there on top of the numbers they had sent us. And then after talking with them, we realized, oh, you did build it into your numbers. We built more on top of that. And so we want to correct it. So they're not having overinflated revenues in the budget and have to meet an expectation that's not realistic. So.
Yes. Another kind of follow-up question on that. Are we also passing on the credit card processing fees?
I am not familiar with that. I'd have to, John's shaking his head no.
Only right now, it's only happening with utility sales that are happening through Conventus. There has been some discussion about looking into that, and doing a review of it right now. It's in the budget.
Are we doing it with 311 too? Or I'm sorry, with customer service when you're paying for fees there?
Yeah, with the customer service through the utility bill, yes.
Okay.
That's been happening for years.
I paid that fee many times.
Yes.
Okay.
We also did it when we filed for office. So it must be something like whatever charge they take, because I had a fee on it's not just the regular $75 or $70, whatever it is. It's that plus the credit card fee.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like we're not recouping the credit card processing fee for Parks and Rec, but we are in other parts of the city.
It's 311.
Okay. All right. Please continue.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on that, so I would defer to what John said. Okay, so let's now go to kind of new information. And I do want to point out this Park and Rec stuff down here. Those were corrections. And you can see like the difference for the rec center net income and then the difference for the Parks and Rec capital fund budget. Those two numbers are in the red and green on the side. You can see those numbers appear down here on the bottom, just so you can see how that fits into just the overall general fund balancing. I do want to say that these changes do balance the general fund, and so it's not like we're coming to you saying, help, we didn't get it fixed. But here we have some new information, and general services is where we added $138,000 in revenue to property tax after receiving the certified property tax rate from the county. We've kind of reviewed some revenues, and miscellaneous revenue in FY24 is trending to be lower than what we budgeted this year. And so we just wanted to get it closer for FY25. So we reduced the miscellaneous revenue by $41,000. For police, this nets out, but I did want to highlight it because there was a supplemental that was granted involved in this one. So Chief Beebe, after the tentative budget was presented, he had decided, and he presented on this language program supplemental where officers who spoke a second language would get some compensation for that. He wanted to build that in, but then had decided that a real-time crime center was more of a priority for his department. So he just asked, instead of putting money toward the language program, which was in their personnel budgets, could we increase their contract service budget by that same amount so that it would have a net impact on the overall budget, but that the funds would be where they would need to be. So that is a recommended change. And then going back to the Parks and Rec correction, decrease the rec center revenue, and then decrease the Parks and Rec capital fund expense budget. So with all of these changes implemented, it still nets out to zero and you have a balanced general fund budget. Any questions on this?
First, I'll just say that Catrice McKay has joined the meeting and she's going to be taking over now. Huh? Oh, never mind. I'll still take over. But she's here, and so we have all of our counselors present. On the police change, so this is the first that I've heard that he wanted to switch the way that the funds were being allocated.
Yes, and that was done through email, and we worked with him closely, just kind of helping him realize, I think just because police is facing that personnel, like they've been able to use personnel savings to help with operations in the past, just kind of as they've been wrestling through priorities and how to handle that, this came to the top. And so that became something that they wanted to address before the language program.
Okay, yeah, I would maybe ask our council staff to follow up with him so that we can know a little bit more about what he's thinking.
Yes.
Certainly, we've had conversations about the need for language programs and outreach and have been assured that they're doing a good job. And so we want to be sure that this will not negatively affect that.
For sure. I think that's a great idea.
All right. Are there any other council questions for Kelsey about these little shifts and changes?
There are a few more in other funds that I can address. These are just general funds, so.
Catrice McKay.
With Parks and Rec, do they collect the credit card?
Oh, we went through that.
Oh, sorry.
Not yet.
Not yet. Are they going to?
I think that's up for discussion. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Henderson.
So we went through the process with Parks and Recreation about sales tax and doing that. And so obviously that is and that was part of the double up. The credit card fees with the amount of transactions, and we could sure look at that, but that is going to be a complicated process. So I think it's worth studying though, Patrice, because you've seen probably the line items that say merchant fees and all those things, and they add up to be a substantial for that convenience of payment that in our what seems to be a cashless society now, but having that convenience and that payment do it. There is some concerns within the department about taking things off round numbers. So if if we're on $5 or $6 and it moves it up to with a 2.5%, then we're charging $5.13. And then with the amount of, 8,000 people a day coming into some facilities, it creates its level of operational conflict. But what I think administration would be more than happy to look at it and discuss it through.
But haven't we already done that by charging the taxes on top of it instead of just taking the money out of that?
That one, we tried to go with the round. If do you want to go before I talk, Becky? Or, okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know it's your hands up, but we went up to $5.50 and $6.50. So it's actually, we're a little bit more to stay on somewhat round numbers. Whereas with the merchant fees, it's a set percentage. So you're not able to do that. You're not able to charge the customer more for merchant fees.
But isn't like everything through a computer, and just if they pay for a credit card, it would just add that to it. And I think you'd think it'd be a simple programming thing. You just hit credit card people.
I don't know if it's as simple as.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Bogdan.
That was my question is, why not just keep it at a set fee and just bump it up like you did with the sales tax instead of, but is there like a certain percentage that we can figure out? Like we have this many in family memberships and this many in this, so we'll just allocate. Because the average charge in the family membership is going to be this much, so we'll just allocate that up. The average charge and $6 fee for that's going to be this much, so we can just charge that up.
From my initial assessment, it's only credit cards and it's not debit cards. And so there's quite a bit of research on the percentages of who pays by debit card, who pays by credit, and so all those getting that impact, it's going to be difficult to know exactly where Yeah, I don't know how many people use credit cards to pay for admission to the rec center. I just don't know that. I've never asked for that statistic, but now with this discussion, probably it's time to do that.
So that we're like the Sinclair, if you pay by cash, this is your fee. If you pay by card, you have this fee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've seen those at the gas stations, right? The cheap, like Sinclair.
Yeah.
Councilor McKay? All right, thank you for your input on that.
All right.
Yes, Kelsey's our.
Okay,
back.
there's just two more slides of changes. This one's really short. So the library, again, when we got the certified tax rate information from the county, it actually boosted the library's revenue by $83,000. And so what that did is it just reduced the deficit. Carla didn't ask to increase any expenses with that money. And then these are all kind of interconnected, involving the rental rehab, CDBG, and home consortium funds. So, and the list is here if we have more questions about this. But first of all, the rental rehab fund is kind of unique and honestly one that I haven't had to pay attention to for a while, just because it hasn't done much. I believe it originated 30-ish years ago. HUD was administering a program exclusively for rental rehabs, and that program eventually ended, and we still had a balance in that fund, and it wasn't really tied to anything. Although I think the idea was to perpetuate the balance in there by doing a loan or two to some groups that wanted to fund some low-income housing, and so they took out a loan and have been paying that back over time. So I think that's been the only activity going in there. They have about $1 million in the fund balance, and just based on some needs that have come up in the past couple of weeks, we're recommending that $50,000 be added to the fiscal year 25 budget for a housing market and housing needs study. And then that $90,000 from the rental rehab fund to be transferred to the CDBG fund to help offset some of the federal grant revenue loss there. And so that takes us down to CDBG. You can see that they're going to be getting that $90,000 from rental rehab. The federal grant revenue has gone down by $124,000, and then to also help offset that grant revenue loss, they've gone in and reduced the capital expense for the CDBG projects by almost $100,000. Then home has also lost some federal grant revenue, almost $300,000, and to help offset that, capital expense, again, for home projects is being reduced by $364,000. And so I know that's a lot, but they're all kind of interconnected. Are there any questions on those?
Councilor Bogdan.
So when we talk about housing market and housing needs study, what exactly is that?
Yeah, Melissa would be the best one for that.
So the housing market and the housing needs and homeless analysis are reports that we are required to provide every 5 years with our consolidated plan. So those are required by HUD. And we should have those to submit next spring.
What does that look like? Like, are you going out and counting every single house and saying?
No, it's to determine the housing needs within the consortium boundaries. So we have to do a study, not just for Provo, but because we manage the home dollars for all of the consortium, which is most of Utah County. So it's to determine what housing is available, where the shortages are, and what's needed.
So how do they do that? Do they go out and just look at county lists and say, okay, we have this many with this many?
Through census data, I imagine through the University of Utah, the Garden Institute, through those studies, we have a consultant that comes and puts that information together for us.
And then it says how many duplexes we have, how many single family we have under 500 square feet.
No, it's not as detailed as that. It's just what we need, what the housing needs are, what kind of low income housing and affordable housing is needed, what areas are underserved.
Melissa,
Since you said we have to do that every 5 years, presumably we have an old one that you can
We
probably
do.
circulate
Yes,
so
there's
they
a
can get an idea of what it
consolidated
looks like.
Right, there's a consolidated plan on the website that will have all of those studies included in it.
Thank you.
So this, it sounds like something that's a reoccurring expense that we have every 5 years. So it probably should have been in the budget before, but fortunately we caught it and put it in now.
I'm not sure how it was funded 5 years ago. Melissa's standing with you.
All right, Melissa.
So this is something that we have funded in the past with our CDBG administrative dollars, and every year we've seen that the CDBG funding decrease. So this is the first time I think that we have needed to go elsewhere to find the funding for this.
And so by getting the funding elsewhere, we're able to continue to provide more services for people because we're not taking that $50,000 away from it. Is that right?
No, because it's administrative.
Okay.
It's administrative, and that's it's comes in the same entitlement, but we're limited to a certain percentage. So
Oh, so if they're giving you less money overall, then you have less money for the administrative budget,
Yes.
but your administrative costs are not going down.
exactly.
I see. Okay. Yes, Counselor Garrett.
Kelsey or Melissa, could you give some color to the reduction in federal grant revenue? What percentage reduction is that, or what you anticipated?
Sure. I think it was, so between the two, so we use funding from CDBG and home to cover administrative costs. I think it was an overall 9% reduction, I think, in CDBG. And I can't remember what the percentage was in home, but overall between the two grants, it was a total of 426,000 less that we're getting to cover between administrative and capital projects.
And has that amount?
It was us more and the county went up.
Oh, really?
So I think that's big. Sorry, Chief Moore, the Economic Development Director, Assistant Director of Development Services. We're not sure. One of the things that Melissa wants to work on this next year is trying to find out about what's going on. What we think might be happening is because the county is growing faster than the cities are, they got more money and the larger cities, Provo more, got less. We're thinking, but we're not exactly sure why.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you.
Those are all of the changes in the tentative budget. At this point, obviously tonight it's not a council meeting, but for next week, we would probably need a motion from the council to either include changes, requesting that the changes presented tonight be included in any budget action brought next week, so we know to prepare the budget accordingly. So that would include the changes that we talked about tonight on these slides.
Okay. So for that, do you just need kind of a general indication from the council or
Motion.
or do you want a real motion?
Motion, Brian, do you think?
Motions are generally better.
Motions are better, huh? Do we have a motion on this?
I'll make a motion that we accept the changes as presented by Kelsey, administrative staff.
Do we have a second? All right, that motion has been submitted by Travis Hoban and seconded by George Handley. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, we will now take a vote. Counselor Garrett,
Yes.
Counselor Bogdan,
Yes.
Counselor Handley,
Yes.
Counselor McKay,
Yes.
Counselor Whipple, yes, Counselor Hoban,
Yes.
and Counselor Christensen.
Yes.
All right, that vote is 7-0 unanimous.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Kelsey. We will now move on to our second item. This is a discussion regarding the fiscal year 25 budget and property tax. It will be presented by Justin Harrison, the Council Executive Director.
All right, good evening, council. I know there is nowhere else you would rather be on a non-regular council meeting Tuesday evening at 6:01 than here. everyone. So, we will go as fast or as slow as you want to. I've got a lot of materials up here, so happy to answer questions. Just feel free to chime in and we'll go from there. Just as a quick reminder and overview, this is what the tax dollar breakdown looks like for roughly every property tax dollar from Provo citizens. You've got roughly 60% of each dollar that goes to the school district, 17% that goes to the city, 15% to the state, 8% to the county, and my eyes are bad, 40% to the Water Conservancy District. So again, we've talked about this a few times before. The city has different portions or line items within the city's portion of the property tax, and that includes the portion for our bonds, which is roughly 8% of the total. So 8 cents from each dollar goes to pay off promissory bonds. General operations, for the funding for the general fund that comes from property tax is roughly 6 cents, and the library is roughly 4 cents. And yes, added together, those do not make 17. That's okay. There you go. Close enough for government work. No, they are rounded, so they are rough approximations, but in total, roughly 17 cents of each dollar in property taxes that Provo citizen pays is going to the city. We've seen this slide before when we've had this discussion, but just wanted to give kind of an update. Kelsey had talked about the auditor certified rates that had been given to the city from the county just a few days ago. And as this slide indicates, as valuations go up, rates go down, well, valuation on the whole in the city went up. It went up approximately $500 million, so quite a bit. The total valuation for the city is just a tick under $10 billion. So as valuations went up, rates have gone down. And you'll see that indicated here. I hate and love these charts. These are from the state's website, and there's a lot happening and probably way too many colors. And we'll submit that feedback to them. But it shows how your revenue stays roughly the same each year. And that's by nature of valuations going up, rates going down. So your total revenue stays about the same. What you'll see in this second kind of box is on the bottom, you'll see your 2023 year-end budget revenue, your tax rate, your final rate, and then the percentage change. So rates changed for the general operations. They went down roughly 2.25%. For the library, they went down roughly 2.75%. And that's again due to valuations going up on the whole, so bringing that rate down. Now that looks different once you start talking about individual households, but this is on a whole at the city level. So as you can see, your revenue is roughly the same in FY24, so year-end 2023, $5.469 million in general operations revenue. The certified revenue without new growth, $5.491 million. So on the whole, staying roughly the same. Your new growth revenue is $117,000 for general operations, and Kelsey mentioned these numbers earlier. Library, an additional $82,000 is what came in from new growth. Yeah, so that's any questions there on just kind of functionally how those rates work, why how the revenue stays roughly the same, or where that new what do I want to call this, new growth revenue comes from. That's from new building, new construction happening, coming out of the property tax rolls, and giving the city this new growth revenue.
I have a quick question. So my understanding is that we charge different taxes for your primary residence than you do for a second residence that you have?
Yes, so the state gives a property tax deduction, so it's 55% of the value, the valuation of your home is what is used to calculate. That's the multiplier on your tax rate. It's my understanding that non-first homes are calculated at the full rate of that rate.
Okay. So if a property goes from being a primary residence to a second one, does that increase in tax go into the new growth revenue? Like, how does that get accounted for, or does it?
So it shouldn't go into the new growth revenue. That will just be from your new construction. It would be factored in. You know, I'm not sure how the county verifies that, and I'm sure they don't have a 100% success rate on those properties changing over. But happy to follow up with the county on that.
Yeah, I just know that so many of our properties are getting bought up by investors. They should be paying more on that. All right. Are there any other questions at this point in time? Okay, Councillor Handley.
So the new growth, that reflects what the county thinks we have in terms of population growth?
No, so that's the new growth revenue on new construction, so.
Just new construction.
That's townhomes that keep maybe.
So you had, you know, previously vacant land or a project
So
that's being redeveloped.
It's a rough estimate of the new population growth though. I mean, why are they measuring the construction but not the population?
So if this is just the revenue that comes in based off of.
From those units.
From the units.
Got it. I mean, I guess I'm still thinking in terms of, as far as the library is concerned, or we are concerned as general operations, we're serving into, you know, if we're a city of 120,000 people versus a city of 110, that has implications for, you know, police officers, other kinds of things. So it reflects a need for a growth in budget. So it still feels like it's a rough estimate population, but I understand what you're saying. Just okay.
All right, Councillor Garrett.
Just a comment on the new growth revenue from 2022 year end to 2023, a fairly sizable increase, about a 33% increase. Has that, John, been customary? Are you seeing that kind of over the last 5 years growth in new revenue based on property development?
So I'm not sure.
So from year end 2022, new growth revenue at $142,000 based on new construction. This past year, 198. So that's a fairly sizable jump in new growth. Has that been common in the last 5 years to see that level of construction?
I think it's definitely a bump on the increase. I think it's higher than it's been. But overall, when you take the total assessed value of the city and the impact, it's there, but it's not a huge impact to overall property tax revenue. But it's positive, which is good. The other thing that we factor into with property taxes collected, okay? We have certain portions that aren't collected at times, particularly related to real property businesses, so that impacts the revenue as well.
I have another quick question that's kind of related to that. Is how much revenue do we end up not getting from people appealing their valuations? Like, how much does that change our final numbers? Do you know, do they come back to us?
I'm not sure. I would think, you know, a lot of times people are, when they appeal and then it's denied, or if they're successful, when they're successful, then that's going to decrease the overall tax that comes to to the city, just on the results of the appeal.
Does the county, do we ever get a report like there were 15 successful appeals this year, it changed your budget by $15 or anything like that?
I haven't seen one, but I'll add that to my list of county follow-up questions.
Alright.
I know last year they did say that it's roughly 70% of those who do appeal are successful, so.
Right, so that should be an impact, but I don't know if there are only 10 people appealing, so 7 properties wouldn't be significant for our overall budget.
And
Maybe it's factored into the next year.
I don't know if it's part of the, sure. What do we call that, John? It's like the prior year tax redemption, it falls into that category.
Okay,
We'll find out.
thank you. All right, I think you're clear to continue on after you write your little note to self.
Okay. So this next slide, just wanted to touch on, we'll jump into library and then we'll go to general operations. So this is just a breakdown of the different revenues that the library receives. So roughly 87% of their revenue comes from property tax, whether that's from prior year redemption or from the current year. So they are very reliant on property tax. And this is the case for most libraries. I know there were some kind of questions about that from council members on kind of revenue streams from other city libraries or library districts. And they're heavily reliant on property tax if they have a property tax line item, or from a general fund if they're a general fund funded library. And it's a little bit of apples and oranges comparison, but there are some jurisdictions that don't have a line item, do have a library, and they fund that through the general fund. And I don't know what that breakdown as far as mix is. You know, are they funding that out of their general operations portion of the property tax? Is that coming from sales tax? It, you know, at the end of the day, it comes in as this general fund bucket of revenues. So hard to tell, but do have some calls out to different municipalities to see how that works. In addition, the biggest,
Justin, we've got a question from Councilor Bogdan.
Okay, so you're looking at how that works. I guess this question is more for Brian. So does that change if they're funded through the general fund instead of through taxes? Does that change who's over that? The board still has control of it,
Right.
no matter what, no matter how it's funded?
Right, yeah, so state statute provides that, well, again, as we discussed in some of the emails that we had about this, it really depends on how you're defining some of the words. The board is over it in the sense that the board is responsible for preparing the budget and then spending the budget as authorized by the council. So under state statute, the council has to authorize the board to spend the budget.
That they were given.
Right. That you're giving them by approving the budget, right? So by approving the budget next week or in August, whatever, I mean, you approve how much, you are in control of how much tax revenue they get. You're in control of how much general fund monies they are given. If you want to make a transfer from the general fund to them, they're responsible for preparing a budget and presenting it to you for approval. And then when you approve it, they're in charge of spending. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
all right, so the other large revenue streams that the library has, 4% comes from vehicle taxes. I guess I'll step back for just a minute. So property tax equates to roughly $4.2 million in revenue. The vehicle tax is 4% of their revenue budget, roughly $200,000. Rentals, another 4% or $200,000. Fees make up less than $90,000 or 2% of their budget. Interest income is 2% or $100,000 of their income. Used book sales and merchandise, it's right around $30,000 or 1%. And then their last portion that doesn't even register on here, parking permits make up 0.02% or $1,000. So, yeah, you can see they're heavily reliant on that property tax portion. So this next slide will show the library has a statutory cap, just like the general operations portion does, on how high that mill rate can be raised. Their statutory cap is 0.001, and their current rate is 0.000395. So they are less than 40% of their statutory cap. And currently that revenue that they bring in or would propose to bring in based on the auditor's certified rate of 0.000395 is just shy of $4 million. If that rate were to be maxed out, just to give you a dollar figure perspective, would be just shy of $10 million.
A question.
Yes, Counselor Christensen.
And so the only way to raise that is through a property tax. Is that right? That there's no other way to adjust this mill rate?
Correct. Well, there's only one way the council could do that. That's through the truth taxation process. The other way would be if valuations fell, your rates would go up, but your revenues would stay flat. So the inverse of what we've been happening for the last number of years. We've seen valuations rapidly rise, so rates have fallen, but revenue has stayed the same. But the only way to actually affect the mill rate to bring in additional revenue would be through truth and taxation.
Does that answer your question? Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank
yes,
you.
thank you.
All right. So this next slide, what I've done is taken the rates from 2000 to current to 2024. In 1999, there was a large increase to the library rate. This was when it's my understanding that the historic building was kind of repurposed for the purpose of the library. And so that mill rate was raised to near its maximum. And you can see the trend line from 2000 to current. It's been kind of on a steady decline. You had, right around 2010, 2011, you had valuations go down, rates went up, and then this steady trend line going down. So you've seen rates go down, but revenues have stayed roughly the same for the past 24 years, minus new growth. So the city has seen that new growth come in for both the library and the general operations portion. This next chart will show the blue line is your actual revenues that have been brought in by the revenue or by the library via their property tax rate since 2000. It's moved from, roughly $1 million, from $3 million to about $4 million. The red line is an adjustment for actual inflation by year. So it is, when you look at the grand scheme of things, it looks like about 3% over each decade, but you've got kind of these larger swings, especially in the last 5 years of 8%. You've got others that are in the percentage of a percent. But we've taken inflation and matched that to revenue. So it shows what your revenue would look like had previous councils adjusted for inflation over the past 24 years. And it equates to nearly $1 million is where you would sit now. So you're at roughly $4 million in revenue. Had there been an adjustment for inflation, you would have seen an additional $1 million come in via property tax. Does that make sense? That's probably not a great explanation of that, but I'm trying to play part-time economist.
Right, but the idea is that because we get the same amount every year, if we don't do that adjustment, then like we're basically $1 million behind.
Yeah, so the whole basis of the system is that you bring in the same revenue minus new, except with the exception of new growth year over year, and you have to actively do something in order to bring in any additional. I guess another way to look at this, and I did want to demonstrate this on this chart, because it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison, is the question has been asked, what does your buying power look like from 2000 to now? So $100 in 2000 looks like $55 today. So you've seen a 45% drop in that buying power over the past 2.5 decades.
Counselor Hanley, did you have a?
Well, that was how I was gonna try to phrase it, is that essentially, I mean, I guess I was seeing 3 to 4, but you're saying, where did you come up with the 45? I was seeing 25%.
Yeah.
How did you come up with 45% number?
That is,
I mean, if we have, sorry.
so that's your compounded, that would be your compounded inflation.
I see.
Those years. So yeah, your rate has dropped roughly 56% over those years. Kind of going back to the previous chart.
So every year that the rate wasn't raised, but the expenses went up because of inflation, they were effectively doing more with less.
Yes.
Like to maintain that same level of service, they had less buying power in order to do that. Okay. Before I go on, any additional questions on this chart? All right. So we really put this together as this was the ask from the library, to give you an idea of what the proposed increase would look like. So your rate, that's been certified by the county auditor, again, is 0.000395. The library has asked for a revenue number increase of $500,000. That equates to roughly $12.40 a year on an average household. So average household, $450,000, 55% of that, because you're thinking owner, it's a primary residence. This is what that property tax increase would look like. And to give it kind of a different flavor, this has been asked as well. So in terms of percentages, that's a 12.5% increase to the library rate in itself. You're going from roughly $4 million, you're adding 500,000, so roughly 12.5%. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of what percentage is that raising the city rate, that's 2.7%. And if you're looking at it from the perspective of what is this raising the average Provo residence property tax bill, it's less than 0.5%. So just to kind of cover all bases, you can frame this however you want. So since the county numbers think that they'll have an extra $83,000, it looks like the deficit now is only like 451. How hard is it to figure out what that rate would be and what the cost would be then if we drop that extra 50K?
We can tell you right now, if you wanted to make it 450 instead of 500, so that's $11.16 as opposed to $12.40.
Thank you. Wow. You have like a little Excel sheet up there that.
Yeah.
All right, Councilor Handley.
Can you just repeat those percentages that you just said about, I forgot a pen, so I'm gonna just write these down.
Sure. So if you're looking at a $500,000 increase to the library rate, If you look purely at the library rate, what that rate is changing would be roughly 12.5%. If you look at this increase on the portion or the 17 cents that Provo City gets for every property tax dollar, that rate would be going up 2.7%. And if you're looking at this $500,000 increase over the entire property tax bill for an average resident, you're looking at 0.48%.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any additional questions?
I think we're good on this part.
Or discussion? I wasn't sure how you would want to proceed. I can jump into the next couple of slides, go into general operations. I didn't know if the council had questions or want a discussion on just the library. I can proceed however you'd like.
Well,
Counselor Hensley.
yeah, I called Justin earlier about this, but because I wanted to make sure we all understood what the process is, and that the vote that we're taking tonight isn't necessarily on whether or not we agree to the library's ask. The vote is whether or not we agree to consider it. And then we would take 2 more months to deliberate and investigate and get more input, get more public input, and then we would vote on anything. We have to determine a maximum amount that we're willing to consider, but what we vote on in August could be anything from 0 to that amount, correct? Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we all understood that. If we vote today to say no, there's no more investigation, no more discussion.
Well,
With one caveat,
Yeah.
which is the real decision on everything you described is accurate, except the real decision point on what you just described is actually next week. What you're voting on tonight is what you want to tell staff to prepare to bring to you next week.
We want to be considering
The
this
preference
in a
would
week.
be to bring one budget ordinance next week as opposed to many options.
Got it.
Because we've either got to prepare an ordinance that adopts the budget or an ordinance that adopts the tentative budget as the interim budget and sets the schedule for truth and taxation or both. Right, but the preference would be if you know tonight which one you're inclined to approve, then you can give us instruction and we can prepare that. Doesn't mean that you couldn't change your mind next.
Counselor Garrett.
But by the time you get to mid-August for that hearing, you're a month and a half into the fiscal year.
Right.
So what happens if you don't approve a tax increase? Then departments potentially are left scrambling to.
Well, you have two options in handling those 2 months. One is you actually get a choice in what we operate on from July 1st until you make your decision in August. Mm-hmm. You can either say we're going to operate on the tentative budget during that month and a half, or you can say we're going to operate on the fiscal 24 budget for that month and a half. There's pros and cons to both, which John can probably speak to better than I can. But last time around when we did this, the council chose to operate on a tentative budget for that 6-week period. I think that, and again, I don't know if John or Scott wants to address this, but I think that the administration clearly knows that it's not final until it's final. And I think they're gonna, I do have my microphone on, but I'm not looking at it, so I hope you can hear me, Craig. Tell me if you can't. But
yes, I can hear you.
Okay. But I think, the administration recognizes that it's not approved until it's approved. And so I think they would be conservative in how they manage it during this.
So no matter the option, you wouldn't be operating under the auspice of that new tax rate. It would be under the certified rate. So there wouldn't be this
Cash sitting around.
Yes. Any questions?
All right, you can
It's
continue
very
on.
quiet. You want me to jump into general operations?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, are you looking for a decision point right now in the library or what?
What you tell me. We can give you a 30 seconds of silence. Let you sit and ponder. Totally up to you. We can go through general operations, come back, discuss the library. I don't know if there's more informal discussion you'd like to have amongst yourselves.
I think we'd like to go
Well,
ahead
could-
and, oh, yes, Craig.
Could I just suggest something? First of all, I'm a big fan of the library. I use the library. I check books out from the library. And my bias towards not approving a tax increase actually has more to do with the management of the library and not understanding why the rest of the city can do without an increase except this one department. That then leads to questions I have about and I was the one that stirred the hornet's nest about the absolute management accountability and just learning about how it's actually accountable to a board, but it's tied into the city. And again, it just seems an odd connection to me. And so there's some things I don't understand. Now, obviously, this is a very important decision. I want to do the right thing. And I have tonight, yes, I do have biases in terms of how I would vote. I don't have any problem pushing this until next week and saying, yeah, let's keep this open as an option. Because I think certainly I'm just saying from my standpoint, there's more for me to learn and understand about some of these questions. So I just wanted to put that out there because I have been concerned about approving a tax increase just for the library. And again, I hear all the different arguments and over time, the last 20 years, and part of that also, it just doesn't sit right with me. Like, why isn't the library better taken care of in terms of part of the Provo family? It just seems to be like a stepchild and it's been ignored for 20 years. And how is that possible? This is, I'm on the page of, yes, this is a jewel. Now, I also come from a business background, not a government background. And so tightening the belt is not a bad thing in my mind. It can actually bring out the right kind of innovation and creativity. And I don't want to make a decision based on without having more information. And again, being new to this process, there's still things that I'm learning. So this may be premature, but at the risk of just being transparent, I don't have any problem at all in saying, yes, let's take some more time and explore these things and get some answers, because it's not clear to me in terms of some of these issues.
Councilor
Thank you.
Henley.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate your perspective very much. I think I would just want to point out, and maybe this will become more clear if we look at the information that's coming, but the library, yeah, for better or for worse, it's in this really unique category where its revenue has a 87% reliance on property tax, whereas all the other city services have access to the sales tax, to the transfer utility fee. So the rest of the city has, anyway, they have a much less reliance on that one revenue source. And so I feel, I appreciate that you recognize that 20-year issue. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that a library could, I'm sure there are always ways to improve, but it seems to me that the library has done remarkably well, even though effectively we've been cutting its budget every year. And I do think, and you have more experience than I do, Craig, in business, but I would imagine that there's a point at which,
revenue sources being what they are, it doesn't matter how well you manage things, you're going to have to make severe cuts. And I think for us as a council, I think we just have to decide whether or not the property tax is a source of revenue that we like and we want to continue to use and we want to use to our benefit. And if we're not willing to adjust it for cost of living on a regular basis, then we are effectively saying we want to slowly reduce dependency on this revenue source, right? We have some sort of long-term plan apparently to pick in another one or to, I feel like it's a kind of a dead end if we don't have an alternative. If we're just going to say we don't like raising it even for cost of living every year, because if we don't have any alternatives, we're essentially saying we expect the city to continue to provide all the services that it does without by reducing this every year anyway. So I philosophically, I think we have to think that through well, and I think if we don't like it, I would like to know what the alternatives are, because I think we're slowly strangling certain services in the city if we're unwilling to make those adjustments. Anyway.
Yeah, that's fair. Yes, that's a helpful perspective. The other thing I would love to continue to explore is how we help the library from a management standpoint. Yes, there's a library board, and all the boards that I'm on, they're very high level. They don't have the management discipline that you would get as being a part of the city. Now, I understand the state has set this up in a kind of an arm's length way, and I would love to look at ways to increase the integration of the library into all the services that the city has. I know on paper it's there. I'm just puzzled as I hear the report outs in terms of the disconnects. And so that's another thing I would like to look at if we decide to continue to explore this.
Do we have any idea why that decision was made in the first place to create a separate property tax category for the library and not include it in the general?
I can speak, this is not expertise, but just what I think I know, and I've had some involvement here and there and reading things, but my framing of it is it's library lovers and protectors who wanted it this way, because you can imagine how once budgets get tight, what's the first thing to start to go? And so this is designed as a shield and protection to keep libraries alive. Because if you're just part of the general fund and things get tough and you need more police officers. So I think that's the intent behind it, is to ensure the long-term survival of a library. And I think that's probably right from some of the research that I've done as well, because one of the things I found is that under state law, money that is put into the library fund can only be spent for the libraries. You can't ever claw it back.
Yeah.
There's been changes to state law over the centuries, and I started looking at the basis for the tax law, and it's a 1921 case referring to a 1919 statute that doesn't exist anymore. But so I think some of it is also custom, that back in 1919 there was a state statute that specifically provided for libraries to be funded by property tax. That's gone away at the city level. It still exists at the county level, but I think that but the city has been using its general property tax power to fund the library, but has continued to follow the model that has been the historical model for funding libraries. And I think it is probably because it protects it and can't be undone once it's given.
That makes sense.
I just wonder if there's a hybrid model that allows for the best of both.
Possibly.
That allows the arm's length, because that makes sense to me. I think it was you, the one that was giving the assessment on why it was put in. That would make sense to me. And at the same time, I hate the thought of them being on the outside of the fiscal rigor and discipline that comes from being like directly a part of the administration. Again, I know enough from, boards don't do it. Again, at a high level, and I look at our director of the library, and I think we're asking a great deal of someone who could just use more help. And so I would really like to explore more of those options and see what those might be.
Councillor Garrett.
I think you framed it well, George, in saying that the over time, you either have to increase the revenue sources or decrease services. You can't just keep everything the same over a period of time. A question for you, Craig. You said that you are willing to take more time to discuss and look at options related to the library management and its budget. Could you define, by that, do you mean a week, as in next week's budget meeting, or are you saying 7 weeks, as in truth and taxation in August, knowing that we have a full range of increased for that?
Yeah, fair question. And my bias would be sooner than later. So again, unless there are some remarkable things that we need to create, it seems like a week's time should get us close to a good choice here. And I want to make a good choice for the library. And I also want to make a good choice for the city. Again, I don't take the tax increases lightly. The administration has worked very hard to not increase. And so I just need to get settled in on some of these discrepancies, and especially around what are the systemic things that have gotten us to this point and would allow a library to dangle for 20 years. I don't understand that.
Councillor Handley.
I'll make an appeal to you, Craig, or to anybody else on the council who feels similarly, that I think 1 week is not going to be enough time to wrestle with those questions. I think the question, I'll also maybe speak on behalf of the many people we've already heard from. I think a lot of citizens will want to weigh in on yay or nay on whether or not we consider raising the property tax for the library. And if there's a feeling on the council that, hey, all those emails were from people who are already on the email list, that's fair. All the more reason to hear from the general public as much as we can between now and the time when we have to make the decision. But I don't see how in 1 week's time we're going to be able to figure out some sort of solution to governance of the library. I'm also not entirely sure why the governance question is something that can't be separated from this for now. If there's a different arrangement we think would work better for the library in terms of reporting and accountability, then I think that will take quite a bit of time to consider and look at different cities' models and figure out how we might improve that structure and the communication and so on. But I feel like we're running into a lot of speculations, which may turn out to be true. They may not turn out to be true, but within a week's time, I think we're going to be stuck with speculations about what we think the problem is. And meanwhile, I think we're running the risk of not providing more revenue to the library and having to cut $800,000 worth of services. So I would hope that we could consider this for what they're asking, that we agree to consider it. We're making no commitments to saying yes, that we're going to approve it, but gives us time. It gives the public more time to think it through. It gives the staff in the library to tell their story a little more. I just feel like a week doesn't do any of that for me.
Yeah,
that may be inadequate.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So
let me just add one other thing. Okay. The complexity for me isn't, I I'm a staunch library fan. So all of the emails coming in, I could have written one as well. I love the library. I value it. I use it every single week, literally every week. And so to me, it's not an issue of, do I love the library? It's an issue of trade-offs. Just like we as a council have made trade-offs on the west side and safe sidewalks to schools. We could also spend more time saying, should we be spending a lot more money on safe sidewalks to schools? And I think we would have a lot of people say that's a good idea. We need to do that. And at the same time, we're trying to balance all this with the resources we have. So we're not opening up that as a discussion point. I don't think we need validation that people love the library, because I too love the library. To me, these are more fiscal issues that we need to address and understand. And your point is well taken. That may take more than a week to do. That's fair.
All right. My thoughts on this is that I went through and wrote down the names of all of the people who emailed us from Monday until this meeting started in support of the library. There were 116 emails that I got from distinct individuals who responded to the library's call. 116 people is an order of magnitude more than anyone who's shown up for a truth and taxation meeting in the time that I've been on the council. And all of these people are saying, I'm willing to pay an extra $1 a month in property taxes in order to support the library. And so I think that that's a good reason to move ahead with the truth and taxation, so that this is broadly noticed to everyone, so that other people in the city who pay property taxes, not just those who are on the library email list, have an opportunity to know what's being considered and to weigh in. And they could say if they, not the core library patrons, would be supportive of this as well, or if that $12 a month really would be an onerous burden that, yes, $12 a year. Thank you, Catrice. If that would be a burden that outweighs the benefits of not cutting services at the library. So I would be in favor of doing the truth and taxation so that we can have the wider conversation and not just the 116 emails in support of doing it. That was my thought, because I do want to have input from a wider range of our Provo residents who are affected by the taxes. I'm also concerned that if we don't go ahead and do a truth and taxation on it, then we're ignoring the input of the department and of the board. And this board is actually quite involved in a very detailed level, and they've been working on this budget for a long time. I know some boards kind of just, rubber stamp whatever the director says. That has not been what I've observed as I've sat on the library board for these past few months. And I would certainly invite Craig or other council members to join the library board meeting. Those are open to the public. We can all go. Anyone can go to these meetings.
3 of us can go.
Not, okay.
Actually, all of you can go because it's not your meeting.
Oh,
It's not our meeting.
So you're just guests. You can all go.
We're just showing up there, but
no motion.
the general public. Yeah. No. We can't co-opt their meeting. But it has been interesting for me to be on the board. I did not volunteer to be the council member on the library board. We basically played the game of not it. And I was the person who figured out I could take time off of work to go and serve on this board. And now that I'm on it, I take this responsibility seriously, and I see my role as the council member on the board to let you know what I've learned as a board member and how they've had the conversations. So if you have more questions about that, you don't want to talk to Carla or to the board members, you can certainly talk to me and I'll share what I've learned in the past few months that I have been on the board, which hasn't been very long. One other thing I will add is that Carla is out of town right now. So if we needed more information from her, like before next week's meeting, I think that would be very difficult to get. So I think the longer time period would be more appropriate for that. Did I have other notes?
Yes, you have 4 pages of them.
Well, okay, well, I'm gonna say that the 3 pages are the list of the names, because I just saw those emails coming in and how many are there? So here they are. Unfortunately, my note pages are numbered, so it was really easy to count them once I wrote them down. All right. Do we have additional discussion about the library at this point?
Well, I'd like to just maybe ask the council if do you want to wait and look at the rest of the information that Justin has, or should we have a motion and discussion and vote now on the library? I'm happy to wait, but I'm also happy to do it right away.
Councilor
I
Garrett.
think it's helpful to take it in context of, the things he's prepared as well. Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that lays we staked out our positions. Let's go ahead and hear what we have for the rest of your presentation.
Yes. And actually, I've got a few more things on the library.
Oh.
Later to the point, but there were a few counselors who reached out today wondering about what this looks like in terms of other libraries within the state of Utah. And so I don't have any slides, and by no means is this in depth, but kind of the cursory overview. So you've got 6 jurisdictions that allow for a specific property tax on or for libraries, a specific portion dedicated to libraries. So Provo, Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Highland, Murray, and Washington County. So you've got a small universe, but just looking in aggregate at what their budgets look like, their revenue sources are very similar to this breakdown. You're in the 80+%, some 90+% in this reliance on property tax, and then you've got these kind of small portions of your pie, your vehicle tax, fees, kind of just small portions that make up the rest of their budget. You do, on the other hand, have some other jurisdictions that have libraries and they fund them out of their general fund. So a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison, and a little harder because you've got this revenue bucket of general fund that they're funding out of. You're not really taking specifically from general operations property tax dollars or sales tax dollars, but the general fund bucket in order to fund their libraries. And we took a look at a number of those. Orem, Spanish Fork, pull up my list here. Orem, Spanish Fork, American Fork, and Springville, kind of nearby cities. And so we can definitely do some more in-depth analysis on what those budgets look like. We wanted to give that for some context.
Do you have any idea how big their budgets are, comparable cities?
We do. So let's see. I've got so like Spanish Fork, expenses were roughly $2.5 million. Revenue was only $77,000. So and that's due to the nature of how they set up their budget and not understanding or knowing internally what that's coming from. That's just library-based revenues, not revenue that's going to pay for those services. Let's see. Murray, a jurisdiction that does have a property tax portion for libraries, brings in roughly $3 million. Their expenses in their FY 25 budget were roughly $2.5 million, and they are setting aside funds because they are trying to build a new library. And so they have set this goal of over in the next 10 years to set aside $500,000 a year so that they can pay for a new library building. Highland also has a property tax portion, much smaller scale. Their revenue, $450,000, and that was equal to their expenses. So they're spending what they're bringing in. I will readily admit Salt Lake and Salt Lake County are kind of unique beasts. Salt Lake County, you've got a district system with 18 branches and really providing library services to all of Salt Lake Valley. And so their revenue is, just shy of $62 million. And their expenses, and they don't operate off of a fiscal year, they operate off a calendar year. So their updated budget numbers as of just a month or two ago, expenses look to be about $58.5 million. So again, heavily reliant on property tax. So of their revenue, 85% or so comes from property taxes. And then last, Salt Lake revenue, roughly $36 million. Of that 34 million coming from property tax, and their expenses at $35.5 million. And they have 8 branches. So another piece to consider when trying to compare. The universe is really small. Let's see if I can pull up some of these some funded by their general fund. So Springville funds their library out of the general fund. So just shy of $2.1 million, and $2 million comes from their general fund. So it comes from taxes somewhere. The other just shy of $100,000 comes from grants, fines, fees, donations, rentals, very similar to the other library models. American Fork, general fund revenues of $1.2 million, and about $28,000 coming from other revenues. Orem, very similar on the revenue side. They fund this out of their general fund, but about $4 million. And then they've got roughly $200,000 that come from sales, fees, fines, grants, and their foundations. So just to kind of give a perspective, and like I said, we can do a deeper dive, but that was kind of where we got to today.
So we're pretty average with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what it says is that libraries just don't generate a lot of revenue on their own, like through fees or events or services. That's just not where they're not money makers.
Right.
Yeah. I did have a conversation with the director at the Orem Library about how they are charged for special events and things like that. And he says that they're just rolling this out. So they'll do their first charge for special events this fall. So they haven't been doing that yet, but that they have made it a priority to protect their core services. So they don't charge for Libby, right? Or checking out books. They've cut their fines in half for late fees and damaged books because those end up being regressive fees. Things like story time, also part of their core services. And then there are auxiliary services like programs, clubs, rentals, ticketing shows. They want to make sure those are self-sufficient. And in some cases, they want to charge greater than 100% cost recovery rate in order to help subsidize the core services. But that is for things like ticketing and shows, and everything that Justin has just said is that like the smallest part of what a library does. But one of the changes that they're looking at is like the maker space, which we also have. And so the idea there is that it's free to use to access the space and tools, but they're going to start charging if you're in a club, right? Where you're there twice a week and using staff time and a lot of materials. So there'll be like a little monthly fee for that extra use. And so I'm going to be discussing all of this with Carla and seeing, but from other conversations that we've been having, the amount that they can make up by doing these adjustments is in the thousands of dollars range, not the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. But they are, yeah, every little bit, the board is committed to doing what they can. Yes.
So when I looked at their budget, I saw a $13,000 increase in one of their events part. Then they had a $10,000 decrease in the attic special events. And then in the children's, they had an $8,000 increase. So when I look at this, I see in a tight year, those should either be level or decreases. And I'm seeing increases in those parts. Do we know why they did that? Why they're not level, why they're not a little bit decreased?
Yeah, I'll look
Can you
and
ask
see
her
if
that?
I remember from the conversation, but we'll certainly ask. I know that with the attic, they decided not to bring in outside artists that they have to pay to bring their exhibits to, and they're just doing local artists. So that's how they were able to cut out that $10,000 thing.
Right, but they've increased one budget by 13,000, the other budget by 8 in that special events, and they're not level. It's like they're going up and they're not living in the same thing that they did last year. They're increasing.
Okay, I'll check.
Thanks.
Yes. The last thing I'll add, then I'll go back to Justin, is that it does make sense that these are funded by property taxes in my mind, because all of our residents get a free library card, right? So everybody who's here and paying the property taxes has access to this service. And if you live outside of the area, you pay what the $80 fee or whatever it is to have a library card to come and use the services. And I think that makes sense. I imagine that's in the fees though. So there aren't that many people doing that for us. All right, back to you, Justin.
All right, well, I forgot, something at the beginning. I promised I won't go back to the library, but just wanted to give a shout out to the Dream Finance team that's, plugging along back there with us. Just thank you to John, Dan, Kelsey, and Andrea. They've probably more annoyed with my emails, phone calls, and drop-ins. They have been super helpful with all of this and all these questions, and this presentation. So just a thank you to them and recognize all their hard work. And speaking of their hard work, this is a graphic that I stole from their tentative budget. So this is a chart of property tax rates based off of the current fiscal year, so FY24, so based off of year-end 2023, that just shows where the general operations portion of our property tax rate sits in compared to other cities in Utah County and other similarly sized cities in the state. So you see us there down by Eagle Mountain, way out yonder. So similar to the library, this is a breakdown of general fund revenues. I think, I'm advancing on mine, but not on yours. So a breakdown of general fund revenues. And I think this is important in the context of, you've got the example of a library that is so reliant, almost wholly reliant on one source of revenue, and that makes stability difficult. It's kind of a principle of tax policy. You would like your revenues to be as stable as possible, and diversifying those revenues is what does that. The idea of the three-legged or multi-legged stool allows for you to withstand things that come and adjustments to these different rates or fluctuations in the economy. And if you see here in our breakdown, our largest portion is sales tax. Not that that's a bad thing, but sales tax is definitely less stable than a more stable tax like property tax. Property tax you can almost account for to the dollar year to year, whereas we've seen even these last couple of years, this fluctuation in sales taxes, which can be great sometimes, and in other times like now, where we're reducing those expected dollars in our projections, it can be more difficult. So sales taxes are our largest portion at 33%, or just shy of $28.5 million. Our next largest portion is transfers in. This is a more stable revenue source as it's a percentage coming off of utility rates. Now you've got an extra wrinkle in there, and that setting those rates and adjusting those rates also allows for this transfer in to fluctuate. Likewise, fees are a little more volatile. You don't know what's going to come in year to year. You can project and hope to kind of meet that threshold, but not knowing exactly what's going to come in on fees, which is 14% as well, makes that revenue pie a little more difficult. Franchise fees are separated out from fees. You know, as long as you've got providers and they have long-term contracts in these with these franchise agreements, then you've got a more stable revenue source there. Other revenue, 10%, or roughly, actually, roughly $8.5 million is 10% of the revenue to the general fund. And then you get to property tax, which is 7%, more stable revenue, roughly $6 million that's brought in by property tax. And then lastly, road tax at 4.3 million makes up that final 5% of general fund revenues. So just like the library, this illustrates the percentage or portion of the rate that is currently taken up by the Provo City general operations property tax rate compared to the maximum allowable by state law. So the library, you have just under 40% here, you have 8%. I by no means want this to be, go ahead.
Can I just ask a question? Yeah. Is it just coincidence that the mill rate is almost identical to the percentage of property tax in our general operations? So it's about 7% of our general operations and 8% of state capped mill rate. I'm just wondering if that was, is that just coincidence? I mean, yes. It's gotta be related, I guess, but it's not, the mill rate isn't based on.
Yeah, there's not like a causal relationship there.
But it is interesting. Okay. Yeah, I was just.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any sense of, I mean, when we looked at the rate there, with those other cities, do you have a sense of how we compare with other cities in terms of this number of the other number, the pie, the 7%? In other words, does Orem or, you know, other Utah Valley cities, do they have a higher percentage of their revenue coming from property tax than we do, or lower, or?
That I don't know.
Okay.
We can look into that.
I mean, I understand the philosophy behind diversifying, you know, our revenue sources, and that this is the most stable. So that's one reason why I've always been persuaded that this adjusting every year makes a lot of sense. But I also don't have a sense, though, of like, what's the ideal balance? You know, should we get, would a city be healthier? And I don't know, John, if you want to weigh on this, but I mean, it's like 10% an ideal balance? Is 25% what cities nationwide typically have? Or, I mean, maybe I just have no idea.
Yeah, and part of that is in the sales tax portion, you don't have say. It's set, you know, a large portion of that is set by the state, whereas those other portions of the pie, you do have some authority over. You can set your rates for utilities, which then correlate to transfers in. You can, you know, set your fee rates and franchise fees But sales tax, you're kind of left just waiting to see what the state gives you, as they are the authority there. And you, I guess you don't have any explicit authority from the state in order to change those rates.
Yeah.
But yeah, much like the library, you can see, so roughly $5.5 million is what currently is projected to come in from the general operations property tax portion. The maximum allowable rate by the state is capped at 0.007, which would bring in roughly $70 million. Please do not take that as you should do that, but I mean, it would fund the whole general fund. That would be quite the increase. But you can see where the rate lies in comparison to where it's capped. This is the general operations rate from 2000 to current, the general operations property tax rate. And so you can see it's on a very similar trend line. Valuations have gone up, rates have gone down. So you see the same thing for both portions of that property tax rate. And then a very similar trend line to the library as well. Your blue line is your actual revenues. Versus the red line, your inflation adjusted revenue. So this is inflation adjusted by year. A very similar delta between your actual and your inflation adjusted, roughly $1 million is your difference. I think one of the things that when you look at even take this year's budget or future year's budgets, you know, as the city works to retain, recruit, and hire employees, you're competing against all these other jurisdictions. And so as you've seen inflation go up, but also in a way to recruit and retain employees, you've seen cost of living increases in the last couple of budgets. You see the 2.5% merit rate adjustments. You see the increases to healthcare costs and to market rate studies in order to stay competitive. So that's roughly in this year's budget, $3.5 million. So I think when looking at this inflation adjustment, there's only so many times you're going to be able to cut in order to fill those revenue gaps to keep employees, as when you're going to have to raise rates in order, you've got to find the revenue somewhere. Finding $3.5 million isn't an easy thing to find year over year. I just think that's a comparison that's helpful when looking at this chart, looking at a raw dollar amount, what has to be found each year. So let's see. And so the last slide on general operations, this was, again, just what was brought the last couple of years, this 3% inflationary increase. 3% increase this year would look like approximately $170,000. That looks like $4.20 a year to an average Provo resident. Likewise, those rates, this is a 3% raise on that rate. That would look like 1% increase to the total city portion and a 0.19% increase on a citizen's total property tax bill. So any questions? Just wanted to give you food for thought. Happy to work up any scheme you got running through your mind. Throw it out there.
All right, counselors, do we have scheming?
I was a scheme.
So last year, what was the increase that we did?
roughly 3%.
About, it wasn't exactly that, it was
Yeah.
close. And that was because we wanted to get a certain dollar amount to pay for officers.
So it paid for one officer plus some additional that went to police for their personnel costs as well.
Okay.
So whether that went to overtime, other expenses, I guess going forward, it will not go towards operational expenses because it'll stay in our savings. So.
And we do have the ability to designate where we would want these funds to go, to be very specific about that.
Correct.
And we've learned that we need to do that when we do the ordinance.
Yes, so I think last year we gave, there was a very specific motion on where to place those revenues within the police full-time personnel budget. And finance was able to do that.
Okay. Councillor Bogdan?
Not that I'm advocating for a tax increase this year, but just to throw out there, we are gonna have to look at 9 firefighters in the next 3 years.
Yes, yes, and right now a firefighter or paramedic costs $112,421 a year. Per.
So if that's helpful context, I'll skip over this next slide and we'll come back, just kind of a follow-up on truth and taxation, but
Oh, yeah, there it is.
this was just a slide, trying to, I don't know, guess and read minds on if there was a desire to increase, where would the council like to put this dollar amount? So these are dollar amounts for a number of different FTEs that the council has talked about in the last year and a half. So police officers have come up, firefighters, victims assistants, parking enforcement officer, code compliance, and animal control. And there are some dollar amounts there. In addition, I'll piggyback on Councilor Bogdan's comment. So fire was awarded this SAFER grant for the next 3 years to hire 9 firefighters. The idea within the public safety staffing plan that was presented to the council last year was to budget for 3 firefighters per fiscal year. So when you came to the 4th fiscal year, FY28, you'd be in this position to just transition to paying for those firefighters. Those are not included in the tentative budget. I think there's also been some additional information from the administration on the possibility of stretching those dollars out a little longer. That may last 3.5, 4 years. So that's also some additional food for thought, but wanted to provide what those dollar figures look like, increasing each fiscal year. Barring this doesn't account for that mid-year COLA that the council had adopted in February. It's kind of the average cost. So again, some projections on what personnel exactly looks like for each of these 9 firefighters. So lastly, we also took a look at supplementals from FY23 to 25, just to see what had been submitted each of those years and hadn't been funded. And there were three positions that were part of FY23, 24, and 25 supplementals. Cayenne analyst, patch endpoint management, not an FTE, but systems, and then a full-time cyber security analyst. And then lastly, looked at what were unfunded critical priority positions in FY25 supplementals. And you'll see 2 of those are the same. So the patch endpoint management system, full-time cybersecurity analyst, and then engineering had requested a signal electrical technician. So wanted to give the council some ideas if there was an appetite, what you may or may not have questions about.
Counselor Bogdan.
What is a signal electrical technician?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked.
Am I gonna regret the answer?
All right, so the city has 50, I should have made you guess. How many traffic signals do you think the city has?
50,000.
53, you were right. And also, we've got a number of electrical signs for school zones, driver feedback, and the flashing pedestrian beacons. So the city has one signal electrical technician that maintains all of these traffic lights and systems. They also do all the they do blue staking for utilities, and they're on call for emergencies. So that is kind of their rough job description. Engineering also mentioned that due to the age of the systems, keeping up with necessary maintenance is a challenge with just one individual. So.
Yes.
Any questions on general operations, personnel, truth and taxation? I'll touch on this, and maybe this will cause more questions. We talked about this a little earlier. There were a number of questions asked about merchant fees. Talked with Mr. Morgan, Mr. Henderson. This kind of came up as a question from a number of council members. In the budget, does the city have the ability to make end users pay this? This has been part of, I feel like it's really been a consistent message from the council of ensuring that there's cost recovery and fees, that the city isn't subsidizing user fees. And I think there's definitely a great idea, not fully baked. I think Mr. Henderson mentioned, we don't know the proportion of how much of these are coming from credit cards versus debit cards. On the city's end, would take some time to implement. You've got to notify credit card companies. You've got to make sure you're in compliance with, programming your point of sale systems. It's got to appear on all the receipts. It's got to appear online on your pay portal if you do online payments. And it's also got to be noticed at the point of sale. So would take some effort to implement, but I don't think it would be impossible. So I think an idea moving forward that we'll continue to come back to, but didn't want to just gloss over that idea that they come up with council questions.
Mr. Henderson.
That's all right.
Yes.
I think one thing that is notable on a lot of our facilities that are not charging these merchant fees is they're all covering their costs. Rec center, golf course, Peaks, probably three of the largest ones that have some of the largest merchant fees. They are all with the revenues bringing in, covering those costs. So just a notable fact.
What about the Covey? They have a pretty high merchant fee as well. Are they covering their costs?
No, Covey Center is a subsidized operation. Definitely not as big a budget as those other three.
Yeah, but those merchant fees are pretty high. Have you looked at them?
The merchant fees for the Covey Center. Yeah, they sell a lot of tickets, so I think that goes into those transactions because they act as the box office. I think something that we could look at, which you bring up a good point, Becky, is are we passing on those merchant fees also to everything? I'm gonna say that we are, but I'm gonna check.
I would love it if you check and come back
Great
with a
ideas
report.
come out.
I will say, I just bought a painting from one of the art shows at the Covey Center, and I used a card and I did not have to pay the merchant fees on it. So bonus for me,
Yes.
but you guys subsidized me on that one.
Yeah, I think art sales different than ticket sales, but yeah.
Yeah. But I'm also very excited about my paintings that I got.
By the way, stop by the Covey Center and see their Freedom Festival Art Festival. You'll see some amazing original art for you to purchase.
So if there's no additional questions, just a couple of reminders on truth and taxation. Councilor Hanley mentioned this earlier. The process just allows the council to set a rate that cannot be exceeded. It can always be lower. In fact, last year, the council set a rate, adopted a lower rate, but could also adopt the auditor certified tax rate. So gives you a little more time in order to debate this kind of timeline, what this would look like. The council must adopt a rate on or before June 22nd. So please next week, June 18th. That would be best. If there is a decision to go to truth and taxation, the public would be noticed, and there are a number of statutory changes that happen in this legislative session there as far as noticing, including noticing what those funds would be spent on. And lastly, there must be a public hearing after August 1st or 10 days after the mailing of valuation notice. The county also requires that taxing jurisdictions request a truth and taxation date in March. So we did this long ago, just in case. And so our tentative date would be August 13th, should you choose to go to truth and taxation.
Nice, Councilor Handley and then Councilor Kay.
Yeah, I was just gonna maybe move us towards a motion here, but I want to go back to the library for a second. Because if we were to propose a maximum amount, if I were to propose it, which is what I want to do, that accounts for the increased revenue, you were talking about dropping it down to 500 to 450, but why not drop it down to 420, which is, I think they had a revenue of 80,000.
Do whatever you want.
Okay, so
We'll make it.
I mean, I'm doing like, you know, back of napkin calculations as I am wont to do, but if we drop it down to 420, that brings us somewhere close to $11 per average household. I'm interested in both increases, and I don't know what the best way to go about this is in terms of motions, if we do a motion to. But I'm mentioning this because if we drop the maximum amount that we're going to consider, again, we can go to zero if we want to, but if we're going to say the maximum amount we're going to consider is the equivalent of $420,000, it's about $11 a year. And our proposed consideration for the city portion would be about $4 a year, correct? That's what we were looking at.
420.
420. So I'm just helping everyone understand that what I would want to propose would be the equivalent of about a $15 increase for the average home. That would be combining a proposal to consider a property tax increase of 3% for the city and whatever the percent is for the library at 420,000.
It just,
Yes.
all right, so to address that, the reason it would go down, the deficit would go down to 456.98 is because even asking $500,000, they were still going to be short about $30,000.
Oh, okay.
So if you dropped it by the full 83, then they still have that little 30,000 thing that they need to make up. Catrice was next, and then we'll go to Councilor Bob.
Anyway, let me just finish that
Okay.
thought, is that I just want to be transparent that that's what I'm interested in. If it's preferable to vote on those separately, I think makes a lot of sense, but I just wanted to make sure that I was transparent about at least what I am hoping for as a total result.
Thank you.
Justin, I like that chart you had, you know, where it showed Provo's taxes compared to other local cities. I'm curious, do you have any idea, like on a more macro level, like with the nation, like where Utah is in their taxes statewide?
I don't offhand. Try to get some, or are you talking property tax specific? Was that?
Yes.
Yes, on property tax. So generally, in the most general terms, ranks about middle of the pack. I want to say, was it 24 that we had looked at? I'm gonna pull it up right now.
Okay, while you're doing that, let's go to Counselor Bogdan's question.
Just curious, George, how do you view the firefighters, this nine that we need in the next 3 years?
Well, I fully support it. That would be one of the main reasons why I think making an adjustment this year makes sense, puts us in a better position moving forward. And we can designate that as public safety funds. So I would be perfectly comfortable with that.
I would just say that it would be more than 420 a year then if we did that, it would be high. If that's the.
Well, if you want to contemplate a higher one, that's what that would
Well,
be.
I'm just saying if we don't, I mean, what are we thinking we're gonna do? Just do
Well, we can fund one.
4.5 next year and then 4.5 the next year?
Well, my experience in the last 2 years is that when we've made the adjustment for just the 3%, it's given a little extra grease to the budget wheel for the administration, and they've been able to come up with usually 2 officers rather than just one, or I think 3 instead of 2. I don't remember exactly, but I have a lot of confidence in our administration to come up with some solutions to that. But I do know that if we don't, it sort of goes back to the drum I keep beating, is if we don't help that property tax revenue stay compete with the cost of living, then it's going to be that much harder a year from now, 2, 3 years, especially the longer out you go. I mean, it has, the nice thing about these increases in revenue is that then stays there, right? So that little extra income is going to be there as a base. So I think it just puts us in a stronger rather than weaker position.
Scott, do you have any?
Well, I know Isaac was part of some of the discussion going into it, but part of the decision on this year's budget, and I could speak to the logic on that, is that we felt like this grant was going to last longer than maybe what the initial estimates were. And so therefore we didn't, we're still going to have to address exactly what you're talking about, but it wasn't necessary in this year, hoping for different factors to start going our way. Sales tax, one of those, opening a new target, exciting things happening in Provo. So you hope those circumstances start happening. Isaac has some perspective that because we received a grant does not mean that because the grant goes away, that the responsibility is all on Provo, to cover that, or that would be the greatest tactic in the world by all departments, is get a grant that expires, and then the responsibility is on the council and the administration to put that in the budget. So there is other discussions besides that. I mean, it's a great opportunity to get 9 firefighters as part of a grant and paid for the next 4 or 5 years. But there is discussion, is that just automatically added to the general fund? There's some discussion on that. At least in maybe my mind.
What do you mean by automatically adding to the general fund?
Well, we received this grant for these 9 additional firefighters, and just listening to you, Becky, you're worried about how we're going to pay that when the grant goes out. So I think that's assuming there's an obligation. Yeah.
So you're saying maybe in 3 years from now, we don't need 9, we could scale back to 7 or 5 or.
I think there's probably a lot of scenarios that we'll go through over the next 3 to 5 years, but
I just don't want to be stuck funding 9 firefighters in 3 years from now. I think that would be a nightmare. Right? So yeah.
I understand.
Just,
But a grant does not dictate anything to the council.
can you go back to the slide that shows how much we need to pay each of those 3 years for the firefighters, or need to budget? So does that mean if we needed to budget the 443 for fiscal year 25, then that would be included in 26. So we would need to have almost 900 extra in fiscal year 26 and like 1.3 cumulative. Like, are these things adding up from now? Yeah. So the difference between the fiscal or our budget right now and the one in 28 would be like almost 1.4 million. Our budget guy says yes. Okay. So, and if we do the cost of, or this little inflationary increase for the next 3 years, then we get, 170,000 1 year, and then we do that again. So then we've got, 34, but we're not even close to getting it. But we're closer than we are now. Okay.
Oh, in 3 years, you would pay for 3.
Yeah, in 3 years, we would have paid for a third of it. So yeah, better than we are right now. I do like that you have found ways to stretch things as far as possible. And I do like having optimism that maybe sales taxes will change in the next 3 years, and that can relieve a little bit of the pressure. But I also want to be sure that our, this most stable part of our revenue is increasing appropriately, or just not decreasing in its spending power as we're going forward. I just lost the last thing. Catrice, your turn.
I have a question about sales tax. So my understanding is right now we get bonus sales tax that we don't generate in our own city because we generate so little, correct?
I don't think it's because we generate so little. I think what
Everybody gets the same.
they've
amount?
developed a sharing. So there is a percentage if you get, which is higher in the community that if it's generated in your community, but also there is a sharing of all property taxes based on population.
Okay, so that means
right?
if we do improve our Provo sales tax, we're not gonna lose a share of that shared sales tax.
My understanding is it's 50% of the sales tax is given to where it's generated, 50% is put into a statewide pot, and you divide that statewide pot by population. So a city that has no retail whatsoever will only get that other portion.
Okay, so there's no harming, we get no harm by generating more.
I think one thing that I found in my first citywide budget going through economic development, very important. A growing community, very important. These are things that we should all be focused on because these absolutely drive the future of this community, and it becomes absolutely critical. So I think I made the statement at directors meeting, economic development is every job because we all benefit from it. But that was a real focus, I thought, from this year's budget.
Do we have any further discussion or questions about this? Oh, Mr. Paxman, please.
If I can, I just wanted to share some perspectives on the library that might be helpful. Been the one working, they direct report through me the time I've been here. And just wanted to put on the table in case anybody doesn't know this. So yeah, what you've had at the library is they've had more revenue than their expenses from day one. So when you look back at 2020 when the Academy Square opened, they had more revenue than they needed. And I think it speaks to the sound fiscal management that they didn't spend their budget. Instead, they left a whole bunch unspent every year and let it just sit and accumulate. Knowing that in time, because of what we've talked about, these dynamics of how property tax, what you actually get, your spending power goes down. And so what they've been doing, so they didn't, there's been some modest increases in personnel over the 24 years, but not much. And so what they've done is they just looked at the long arc and said, let's not just spend everything we got, which is the typical thing you see in the world, right? You give a budget to somebody and say,
you know, there it is, they're gonna usually spend it. No, they kept it. And then over time, they have gone to where it's more close in spending, and then they've actually gone to where over the last several years, they've been using some of that save up that they created in the early years to make their budget. And when I first met with, you know, we've got two great directors I've worked with, Gene and now Carla. And, you know, Scott and I share a common passion for efficiency. Scott and I worked together a lot when he was in, you know, the department about efficiencies, and he was always, you know, excited to come and say, hey, we found another way to cut a position, this or whatever. And Gene did the same thing, and those were my first conversations. Can we trim? Is there anything we can do more efficient? And he was able to find a position that he cut while I was working with him. So I just wanted to put some of that perspective too, that now there may be more to do there. There may be more efficiencies, and I mean that's what excites Scott and me. I mean, we love that kind of thing. Can we do more with less? Can we operate more efficiently? And we've renewed some discussions with Carla, brought Scott into the table because he has a lot of great ideas. He's done this at Parks and Recreation. So we're in that process, and we welcome looking at those types of things. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that efficient operations and sound fiscal management is not a new concept to the library. I really think it's remarkable. It's a remarkable success story to look at. You know, you had a citizen vote back in the day to fund it at the current level, and they managed to go 24 years with it by that sound management long-term approach. So there's a great story to tell right here. Yeah, now it's that final moment that we knew was coming. I mean, from day one, I was, Gene, should we look at increasing your revenue? You're starting to spend into some of your extra savings. And he's like, I don't know how I go to the residents and say, increase the library tax while you have this savings sitting there that you're able to live on. So, and that made sense to me. I could see his thinking. We've kind of crashed a little quicker than we thought. That moment has finally arrived, and it's been a little more dramatic than any of us ever anticipated. I just wanted to share those other perspectives.
So just to confirm, Isaac, that fund balance currently sits at around $2 million.
Yeah.
And the board made a decision to try to protect that, to not fall below $2 million in fund balance.
John, are you able to speak to that?
Well, I think the concern is that $700,000 to $500,000 hit would drop it down significantly from 2 million to 1.5 or 1.4, and then at what point, then if we were to have something surprises on the building, we're just getting fund balance to a level where it's not healthy.
And by keeping it up over like, you know, in that healthy range, then you're able to get more interest income from that, which is really helpful for supplementing the budget or for maintenance. Although I don't believe the interest revenue from that balance is enough to cover all the maintenance. So we do need to have more talks about some ongoing maintenance fund that won't deplete that. Yes.
Now, John, the library does have a maintenance fund, doesn't that's held in the endowment in the Provo Foundation, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, Scott. Back when the building was constructed, they actually had some extra funds due to fundraising for the library, kind of a unique situation. And so they came up with this library legacy endowment fund, which is in the Provo Foundation. And that fund has a $2 million balance. And then the whole idea and intent behind the fund was, as the building aged, that they would utilize the interest earnings from that fund to help maintain the building. So that is one of the pieces that Carla mentioned that can help. Not going to cover all the needs, but it's there as a source and the benefit.
So that is a relief valve for repair and maintenance outside of the operating budget.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the issue is you've got like the little like regular maintenance, like the normal things you would expect, and then suddenly you have like big catastrophic things that are just particular to the historic building. So they've got two different kinds of maintenance things to deal with.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, Counselor Christensen.
Isaac, let me ask this to you. You're the one with experience in terms of working directly with the library. Are there things that you think we should recommend in terms of the working relationship with the administration, or do you feel like everything's in place that should be?
To be honest, it's a question I haven't thought about till today and reading some of your emails and things. So let me think about that. It's a fair question, and I'll have to give that some thought. And I'm curious too, maybe before we spend too much time on it, are we just legally bound by what's already in place? And if so, that would be useful to know. So maybe we can look into that if we don't know already.
And we've, Isaac, as you point out, there's been some conversation about that today, and there are legal limits, but to some degree, I think my last comment to Craig to Councilor Christensen on this issue was that in some ways, I feel like I'm giving advice in a vacuum, and I kind of need to understand. It's kind of one of the situations where the state law on it is so ambiguous that you almost have to understand what you're proposing before you can decide whether you can do it or not, which is unhelpful to your preemptive question. But there are limits, and we can, maybe you and I and Councilor Christensen or others ought to have a meeting and talk about some of those.
Yeah, my wheels have been turning on it. I think it's an interesting topic. So let me keep thinking, and let's be in touch.
Well, and my intent is to get the library the help that they deserve. Again, I have this image that they're kind of out on their own, given their structure, and I think they deserve the talent that is there in the city, and maybe that's already happening. So you would be a good one to assess that. I just want the best for the library.
Counselor Handley.
So I'd like to make a motion that we instruct staff to bring for our meeting next week, am I getting that wording correct? To consider a truth in taxation proposal for the library at a revenue equivalent of $450,000 to be voted on next Tuesday for possible adoption in August.
I'll second that. Do we have discussion on the motion? Counselor Hoban.
So I just want to say I really appreciate the library services. We've taken advantage of them. When I was a youth growing up in Florida, used the library all the time in our hometown for, VHS tapes and such. So I have a fondness for public libraries. So I don't want us to, I think some of the emails were kind of like, save the library, right? Don't cut, don't get rid of the funding. So I do not want that at all. One thing I do want to explore though, and I guess I just want to be clear, I tried to signal early on that I didn't want to do tax increases this year. It just seems like a year where there's a lot of tax fatigue. And so I think I've signaled enough probably early on that I wanted to try to avoid it this year. So one thing I guess where I'm leaning would be to ask the library to take one more year, see what blood they can squeeze out of the turnip in the sense of, I've just been jotting some notes down, what can we charge for in special events, ballroom rentals, the video production center, are there things like that, or room rentals? I know I used during COVID, I didn't have an office outfitted, and then COVID hit, and it was like, where do I go to have some peace and quiet to work? So I would use the room rentals there. Well, that's something I probably could have paid for or had my company pay for. And I know there's high demand for those. So, could we charge other are there other areas where we could charge and squeeze out a few thousand here, a few thousand there? Really get a sense for how much blood can we squeeze out of this turnip, so to speak? And then also what can we do in regards to fundraisers, annual giving campaigns, such? And then get a good feel for where our revenue might land. And also it did seem like some of the comments, it was kind of a wonky year for, with inflation and costs, and we thought it was going to be this much and it ended up that much. And I would be curious to see if next year, maybe we have more of a normal year. And then we get a good baseline of like, okay, we squeeze every drop we can out of this and, every cent we can out of this. And then, because I think I empathize with a lot of people not wanting to cut services. So, where can we charge and still offer services and such? And then get a good baseline and reconsider it next year, having hopefully some more information and a good idea of what we really can do from a revenue standpoint and fundraising and such. So I just want to be clear and signal early on that that's what I prefer. And not give any mixed signals.
Thank you. I will note that the library board did vote to raise their fees for the ballroom and other rentals by like 33%. So they've already done that. That still puts them at a very competitive amount. If they raise it more than that, then they'll be higher than market rate for other venues in the area. So they are doing that. And I did check, they have a donation page on the website. She said that it's fairly new and they haven't promoted it a lot in the past, but they're certainly going to look into that. And at the last board meeting, they talked about doing like a fundraiser dance. This is a very preliminary thing, but the idea would be like maybe a Back to the Future theme because it's Save the Library. I'm like, this could be fun. Because the events that they've done have not been to be revenue generating. They're not doing like an enterprise fund or anything, but they are looking at things like that.
Yeah.
I will also remind you that last year, their proposal was the $100,000 increase for the next 5 years. In order to, try to get back on track. They explained why that wasn't working. But I think even if we tried your thing, we would need to at least do that kind of cost of living increase, or at least that 100,000 from last year's, because that was a multi-year plan to get on track. And if there's absolutely nothing, then the track is going to be farther and farther away.
One other thought I forgot to say is like any one-time costs this year that we might need to incur, not for ongoing things, because that's not smart budgeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
To use one time or to use like a fund balance or a general fund. But I'd be willing to look at like, if they need new computers, let's look at the general fund, and I'm not sure that those would have ever fallen into this operating budget that we're talking about. But I would be willing to look, even if we didn't do an increase, of looking at, are there one-time things that we can fund in the general fund to help this year that, might alleviate some of the burden. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of opportunity there because this is an operating budget, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Boilers,
Chillers.
fascia repair, brick repair. I don't know, roof repair. It sounds like that's not, going to help this situation, but I'd be willing to look at that, even if it were a substantial amount to help make it so we don't have to raise taxes, but can still help the library. If that makes sense.
That's great. Other discussion? Councillor Garrett.
I also am interested in acknowledging the tremendous and creative efforts of the administration this year in holding the line to our expenses, and currently not in favor of a tax increase, but am open to continuing to explore, listening to citizens, and continuing this process through to understand what our options are.
Okay. Well, with that, let's go ahead and take a vote on George's motion. Renee, can you remind us what we're voting on?
Councillor Hanley made a motion to instruct staff to consider a truth in taxation proposal for the library equivalent to a revenue of $450,000 to be voted on for possible adoption in August.
Okay, so we will take a vote on that. So this is,
That's me, Counselor Whipple.
that's me. So we will vote on this motion. Counselor Bogdan.
No.
Counselor Handley.
Yes.
Counselor McKay.
Yes.
Counselor Whipple is yes. Counselor Hoban.
No.
Counselor Christensen.
Yes.
And Counselor Garrett.
Yes.
All right. That is 5 in favor and 2 against, so the motion passes. All right. So that is a motion regarding truth and taxation for the library. Would a counselor like to do any other motions at this time?
I would.
Mr. Handley, what would you like to move us to do?
I'm just gonna stick my neck out and then cut off my head at any time. I will propose the same, make the same request of staff to bring forward for next Tuesday a proposal for truth in taxation for the city budget from property tax, the equivalent of 3%. Is that what we had on the?
Yeah, the 3%.
I know we're
would
mixing
be-
data points.
Yeah, 3%.
169, 340.
169, 340. All right. Sorry for speaking over you on that, George.
No, that's okay.
Do we have a second for that motion? Okay, well, I'll second it then. We can do this. All right, any discussion on this? All right, well, my discussion will be, I like that this is consistent with what we've been doing for the past few years, that it maintains our spending power. This certainly is not the full amount that we need to be doing every year, so that in a few years, we would be able to pay for all 9 firefighters, but it keeps us from falling farther behind. At this point, I don't know that I would want to designate it to go to any particular thing, but I think we should be thinking about that over the next week if this motion passes. Like, where would this make sense to give it a home? Yeah, I just don't feel like I could prudently do the increase to match what we would actually need for fire. And that seems like too much. Any other thoughts? Mr. Handley?
Well, I know I made the motion, but I didn't really say much about it. I just, I think, you know, when we looked at the library mill rate at almost 40% and our mill rate is at 8%, and our property tax makes up 7% of our revenue, I think those are concerning numbers. And I think it makes really good fiscally responsible sense to make sure that those numbers don't continue to shrink. We only made those very modest increases the last 2 years. Every year we don't make that increase, we're just going to fall farther behind. So we may very quickly undo whatever little progress we made with those 2 increases. I think we saw in the last 2 years that there was no significant public outcry about it. There was quite a bit of public goodwill, I think, on it. And I think when people understand the circumstances, then I think they support it. We had some wild misunderstandings over the campaign this last year about spending in the city because of federal funds that had come to the city budget and were perceived as sort of ballooning our city budget. We've managed to stay very close to the cost of living in terms of the increase of our budget, thanks to the spirit of careful fiscal responsibility that Isaac alluded to. I mean, I've been on the council for 6.5 years, and the administration has never let us down in terms of coming up with that balanced budget. We've never had to go into debt. We have a general fund that is extraordinarily generous at this point that we can use. So we are in a really good position all told, but we took the first hit this year in more recent memory from sales tax, and I think that concerns me that we're continuing to rely so heavily on revenue sources that are very unstable. And I just think this is very, very modest increase that I think people, like I say, in the past 2 years have largely supported. We didn't have any, I think you understated it. Actually, I don't recall more than 10 people coming to city council meetings on either occasion, if I'm remembering correctly. So, and they weren't even that opposed, as I recall. So some of it was they thought we were the 1 year with the county, they thought we were the county, and then we were the ones who were imposing the 20% increase. Anyway, so it's probably enough said, but I just hope we could consider it for the same reasons. We could have the same deliberations. The council can still say no next Tuesday. It can still say no in August. If we do say yes on Tuesday, that we want to keep considering it, but this gives the public a chance to weigh in and help us to do this right.
Councillor Garrett.
I agree, George, that the what's on the table is very modest, and I appreciate your forward thinking perspective on this. At the same time, I acknowledge the tremendous efforts of our administration to present us with a balanced budget this year, not only reducing expenses, but shifting expenses to fund additional public safety. And that to not propose an increase to the general fund acknowledges, I think, their work and their efforts, and allows us to take a year when we can avoid that.
Any further discussion? All right, then we will do, oh, yes, Patrice, Ms. McKay.
The administration has gone to great lengths to not look to an increase. The only reason I'm okay with this is because we have found this last year that there are so many things we are subsidizing. You know, the rental dwelling licenses, the UTF, the I don't know, there's so many. Our permits are too low, our utility rates. There's all these things that I'd rather focus on this year and get them in the correct place where they're not subsidized. You know, even looking into the credit card charges, and there's actually more money there than this will give us. And then the people who are using it are paying for it, right? So I think we have a lot of things to clean up, and I want to focus more on that this year, and then pick up again with the, truth in taxation for inflation. But that's my thought process.
Mr. Christensen, do you have anything to add to the discussion, or are we ready to vote?
I think we're ready to vote.
All right, then we will go ahead and take a vote on this, and we will start with Patrice McKay.
No.
Rachel Whipple, yes. Travis Hoban.
No.
Craig Christensen.
No.
Gary Garrett.
No.
Becky Bogdan.
No.
And George Handley.
Yes.
All right, that one fails at a vote of 5-2. It does not pass. Any other motions? No? Okay. If there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal. What? Go, it's gonna get us out of
I wanted
here.
to let you get real close.
Yes, so close.
I wanted to ask if there was any direction or motions the council would like to make based on the draft budget ordinance that finance presented last week. There didn't seem to be any hesitation at the time, but wanted to make sure if there was any direction to give staff. Now would be the time so we can come with the correct ordinance.
Counselor Bogdan.
I do have a question I was asked today. Why? Yeah, so close. We were so close. So close. So I got asked today why some of these other departments have brand new vehicles coming out of the gate. Where's that money coming from to get those brand new vehicles, and police don't necessarily have the newest and best vehicles? How is that? Where's that money coming from to get those better vehicles?
That is a great question. The verge of literally anyone's.
Do you have a thought, Sarah?
So I sit on the fleet committee for the city. And I watch and sit through those discussions as they decide which vehicles are going to be replaced. And I see our programs being very conservative, looking at vehicles on their mileage versus their age versus their overall status on maintenance and what each vehicle are costing us. And in my opinion, if we err on any side, we err on slightly not replacing them as soon as we should. But I think we're doing a good job. And the other thing I would say is that when the flag of the fleet committee comes to administration, there's been a couple of years when we were in some real deep recessions where we haven't been able to replace anything. There's a general rule, administration and council has been supportive of it. I will say that, the energy, replaces their vehicles a little quicker than others, but I still think that they run a really clean ship and they benefit from that. So I don't really feel like there's a situation where we've just got lots of new vehicles, but I will say that you will see some new vehicles this year because it's time that the old ones are replaced based on that criteria.
So there will be some of the police vehicles replaced this year?
Oh, yeah. The plan is with this year, the vehicle is going to be replaced from this special earmark grant that's coming that was approved by Congress. We're still waiting for those funds to come in, but we're anticipating and planning on them. And so that is how we're replacing the 20 vehicles this year with police. And that was part of the budget plan.
Okay, and then the other thing that I was asked today that I'll ask, are there any staff within the departments that could double up on responsibilities? I mean, is everybody staffed appropriately, or is there an abundance in staff?
I think you just talked about an analysis that should go on at all times in all departments, and it's really what the departments will be reporting as part of the presentation on efficiency initiatives being taken in every single department. And we're watching for that all the time. Better ways to do things. Sometimes in this overall discussion today, what you're hitting on, Becky, is the loss factor. Is it things that you can do like what John featured in his memo when all the departments came together and found efficiency initiatives to balance this budget this year? I love that part of it. And I love what we do, that government and efficiency can be used in the same sentence. And so I think now it requires individual analysis and working with directors, but that'll be a continuous process that we will always do.
So we feel right now at this point that
You would like an assessment of 750 full-time employees and 1,500 total part-time. That's tough, but we'll get there.
but right now you feel like we don't have staff that are just idle sitting around, that we've eliminated their job because we've had a computer program or something that we're pretty.
No, there there's no staff that is through circumstances that is doing nothing or that is minimal.
I was gonna say, Scott's trying to be politic. I'll just go on record as a director and with my experience
Yeah.
talking to other
Thank you.
directors. I would bet a large amount of money that every department in the city is understaffed, not overstaffed.
Thank you.
And then John, I've always wanted to ask John a question in a council meeting. It's like a dream come true. But John, in that fleet committee, a priority is put on public safety, from what I understand, as part of that, to make sure as they look at allocation, that public safety is at the top of the list, aren't they?
Definitely so. And there's a huge priority for both police vehicles, cruisers, and making sure that they're being placed in a timely pace, as well as, and I think the council that's been around for a while knows of the commitment to keep our fire apparatus and engines up to date and so that we can keep those operational and functional. And so there's been a strong commitment on both of those. And so that's been a top priority for a number of years.
Do we have any post-COVID remote staff still?
I think our use throughout the city was minimal in remote, and some of the departments I think of that probably the most efficient remote example would be customer service. But it's on a very, very limited basis. I think we have really gone with the philosophy of the value of presence on the job. So remote work is not prevalent throughout the entire organization.
All right. Any other questions? Or does anyone want to, I don't know, follow Justin's suggestion? Like, does anyone feel a motion is necessary for direction, or are we okay
No,
with?
I want to say one more thing though.
Yes, please do.
I totally echo what Brian Jones said. And there's been many times in our work meetings and our council meetings where we learned that, a new hire wasn't hired. We absorb a lost person into someone else picks up that work. And I think I think the staff's amazing, and I find it more efficient than I have found in businesses I've been involved in. So, I think that's something we should be really proud of in the city, and how careful we are with taxpayer money in that regard.
Yeah, and I'm always surprised, like, when we did the recognition, the police ceremony, where they were recognizing our officers in different departments, and in animal control, they mentioned that he'd had to be on call for 4 months because they were understaffed for a long period of time. So we have the opposite of people sitting idle. People are taking on more work, and they're stretching themselves so that we can do more with less. Yeah, did you have another thought?
I do, but I do think it personally that does not come at the cost of more efficient ways to do things. You can have a highly engaged red line staff doing things, and we can come up with, in the technology, talking about funding AI, which allows our legal department to be much more efficient and not come back and ask for that full-time position. Looking for progress like that in efficiency helps us hold the line.
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach to make this work.
That was 100% the question that was asked to me today, is what you just said. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any further objections, Justin? No? Okay. If there is no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo City Municipal Council work meeting by unanimous consent. He objected first.
All right. Bye, Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Craig. Have fun.